Good morning, everyone. This is Aisha Martin Walton with the Department of Justice, and I'd just like to say welcome, everyone, and we will be starting momentarily. Could we ask all of the board members who have logged on to please turn your cameras on? And we are in the process of contacting a couple of other board members, and we'll be starting momentarily. Okay. Um, Good morning, Co-Chair Ochoa. We now have Member Hawkins. Lawanda, would you mind turning your camera on whenever you're able to? We have Member Kennedy, Member Randolph, good morning, and a new member, um, Assistant Commissioner Dury. Am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Good morning. It's Dury. Yeah.
Dury.
Yes,
Thank
ma'am.
you. Good morning and nice to
Good
meet
morning.
you.
Nice to
All
meet you.
right, so we can you have enough people to get started, or we can take a couple of moments and try to reach out to, I believe it's member co-chair Vieira. 1, 2, 3.
I think if we have a quorum, we can go ahead and get started, and there'll be plenty of time if he logs on a little bit later for joining the conversation.
Yes.
So
Please go
good
ahead.
morning, everyone. I think all the board members can just introduce yourself briefly. I'm Melanie Ochoa. I am the Director of Police Practices at ACLU Southern California, and I'll pop it over to Lawanda.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lawanda Hawkins. I'm with the group called Justice for Murdered Children, and I'm excited today.
Brian Kennedy. I serve at Mount Zion Church of Ontario in Ontario, California. And happy to be here. Rich?
Thank you, Ryan. Good morning. I'm Rich Randolph, Chief of Police, Cuesta College, and Board Member Ripa representing PORAC. And we'll pass it on to Chief Dury.
Hey, good morning. My name is Sean Dury. I was recently appointed as the Commissioner of the Highway Patrol by Governor Newsom, and it's an honor to be here. Look forward to working with you all. And I do not know who to pass it to, so I'll give it back to Melanie for her direction.
I think that's everyone. I believe Aisha, that's currently on. I don't know if anyone's on the phone, if you mentioned.
Yes, it is.
Okay, great.
That's everyone.
And I apologize in advance. I'm a little bit under the weather, so I'll try to keep up with everyone. I think the first thing on our agenda is the approval of the September 8th subcommittee minutes. If someone wants to move to approve those.
I say approval. I've read them.
And is there a second? And if folks want to take a minute to review, that's also fine. Okay, thank you, Pastor Kennedy. So we can go ahead and vote. I never remember which votes need to be like by person, but we'll just to make it easy, we'll go by person just in case. I'll vote yay to approve. Lawanda?
Yay.
Yep.
Pastor Kennedy, thank you. Rich. I see thumbs up from Rich. Chief DeRay, you can actually still vote, even though we've gone through this before, even if you weren't present, but you can also abstain if you'd like to. That's also fine.
I'll vote yay.
Okay, thank you. So that passes. And then I think the first substantive piece that we have for this is an overview by the Department of Justice.
Good morning, everyone. This is Allison Elgart, Deputy Attorney General with DOJ. I just wanted to give you all a brief update, to sort of set up the meeting. The main update is that today we are going to be discussing potential topics for you all to decide upon for the 2024 report. And so our team will lead you in a discussion, of the different potential topics for post. Among those, one of them is the Museum of Tolerance Racial Profiling Train the Trainer curriculum update. So that will be, a brief update as a follow-on to the curriculum training that many of you participated in providing feedback on last year. Another continuation that was discussed last year was dispatcher training that POST is updating, and the subcommittee's potential review of the dispatcher training this year. Another potential topic is the AB 953 racial and identity guidelines that were established by the statute, and POST can tell you a little bit more about that, but determining what, if anything, the board wants to do about those guidelines, which POST says are encompassed in the various course curriculum that they've presented to the board over the last several years. There's also the POST field training program, entry-level training for all new peace officers in California. And so there may be steps that the board wants to take to start to evaluate the field training program. And another potential topic is going to be looking at accountability as it relates to POST and POST courses of instruction, and that deal with racial and identity profiling. So POST, a representative from POST is actually going to give you all an update on some of these topics, and where things stand with some of these trainings. So I will turn it over to Megan in a second to do that. But essentially, we'd like to come away from this meeting, that's too many topics to cover in 1 year. And so we're trying to narrow down those topics and see what's feasible for the board to do. And obviously some of these, the field training program involves over 1,000 hours of training. Obviously not all of it deals with, and much of it does not deal with racial and identity profiling, but there may be aspects that do. So some of these projects may be multi-year projects as well, for review from the board, depending on the timing. So just wanted to mention that, and also just mention that we are going to be coming up with an outline for the report that will be presented to the full board at the meeting on March 15th. So we're trying to narrow down all the subtopics within each subcommittee, so that we can present all of you with a full report outline in a few weeks. So I think that's it for the DOJ update. Does anyone have any questions before I turn it over to POST?
I'm sorry, Allison, did you say that, so you gave those high-level list of items. Is someone going to talk about more of what those things can entail, either POST or DOJ later on?
Yes, so I think POST will give the update on where some of these things, the status of some of these, and then Aisha and others can help lead the board in a discussion about each of these topics. I just wanted to give you all the broad overview.
All right, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions for DOJ initially? I think we're good. So we can welcome who will be here from Post to give an update?
I think Megan is, has joined us. Great. Hi, Megan.
Good morning, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Megan Polis. I am the Post liaison. Thank you, Allison, for kind of setting the stage for me. So a brief update on the Museum of Tolerance Train the Trainer course. So this course belongs to Museum of Tolerance. It's essentially their responsibility to get the course updated. It's going through the course certification process right now. But with that said, nothing has been submitted to Post yet for review. The course cannot be presented until a review of the course outline, instructor resumes, the hourly distribution, and video portions have been completed. And as of right now, Post has not received those items necessary for the course to be certified. So it's not yet complete. On the public safety dispatcher training.
Can I just ask a quick question just on
Sure.
clarification, just because I don't understand? Just make sure I understand. So there's the course certification program. You said it's currently going through the course certification program, but that it hasn't gone to Post yet. Who does the course certification portion of that?
Post certifies the course,
Okay.
and Museum of Tolerance is the one who creates the course. They have not yet submitted the necessary documents in order for Post to certify the course.
Okay, so course certification is the next step, but it hasn't started that step because it hasn't received all of the things. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. And just to clarify, we're not really sure where the museum is in their process. I just know that we have not received the documents for them to start teaching anything as of yet. The public safety dispatcher training. So we've completed all the subject matter expert workshops thus far. We're working internally on the expanded course outline. So following that review, the documents are going to be made available to the Post Commission for presentation, and at that time it'll be available to the public. We anticipate presenting the update to the Commission at our June meeting, and Post would also like to thank the RIPA subcommittee members who participated or recommended subject matter experts for those workshops. We were able to include several of them. Are there any questions about the dispatch training? Okay, so as Allison mentioned, there's been some kind of questions as far as Post guidelines and the training for the implementation of AB 953 or racial profiling training. This was quite an undertaking for Post to do some historical research on where this all began and where it lies. So the original law mandating that Post create guidelines and racial profiling training was passed in 1992. At the July 22nd, 1993 commission meeting, the commission at that time adopted proposed curriculum from a committee of subject matter experts that stated it met the intent of the legislation. Since then, Post has updated and transformed racial profiling training as necessary. Additionally, an audit was done in 2015 of the racial profiling update and the train the trainer course, and stated at that time that both courses meet the requirements of the legislation. The penal code states for Post to create guidelines and training. Guidelines can be a part of training and are not necessarily always treated as a separate document. And you know, we posted their due diligence. We actually reached out to previous staff who are no longer here, just trying to understand what the thoughts and the process was at that time. But unfortunately, the current Post staff were not employed in the early 90s, so it's really difficult to gauge what the conversations were other than reading through commission meeting notes. that's kind of where we are as far as guidelines and training goes. I'm happy to answer any questions to the best of my ability on that matter.
I have a couple questions, just because first, can you explain what the guidelines necessarily are and what purpose they serve in relation to the trainings?
Again, it's really hard to say at the, because we developed these, or we didn't develop these, but at the time when the law was passed and it was developed, I don't know what those conversations were other than reading through, but typically it's up to the commission to decide whether they want to do separate guidelines, whether they want to do guidelines within the training. We just basically interpret what the law says. So if the law asks post to include, you know, XYZ bullets in the training as the guidelines, then that can be interpreted to go in that method.
I guess more even just fundamentally, not necessarily specific to AB 953 implementation, but what does a guideline do that's different than like a law compared to like, or a training? Like, what is the purpose? Is the guideline setting forth, I guess, what does it set forth? Like what the rules generally are? Is it setting forth how officers should behave to conform with the laws? And if so, how is that different than what is in a training, which I would think would be the same thing?
It really depends on what the subject is. For example, use of force guidelines. The law stated that post had to create guidelines and training. So in that instance, post chose to do a separate document that included basically what the law entails on use of force and what officers and agencies should be doing to meet those guidelines outlined in the law. So it really depends. Another example is on hate crimes. The post was asked to develop guidelines on hate crimes. We took it to the next step and developed a model policy. So in that instance, the guidelines are a model policy for agencies to use set forth for hate crimes. So it really depends largely on the topic and where the need is.
So from the description of those two, though, what it seems like the common thread is the guidelines are more a statement or explanation of the law, whereas the training is something that's more directed to how an officer should act to comport with the law. Is that kind of, to some degree, what
I
the
think
difference
that's a
is?
fair statement, yes.
Okay. And then you mentioned in 2015, there was the analysis to see if it complied, if what would have been created complied. And that was obviously, that's the same year that the law was changed. So I assume that was under the previous law.
That I'd have to go back and look, because again, I was going based off of commission meeting minutes. But from what I read, there was an audit done in that year. I don't have the exact date of when that commission meeting occurred to adequately say where that fell. But at that time, an audit was done on those courses.
I'm pretty sure that the law didn't go into effect until January 1st, 2016. So either way, regardless of kind of when in the year it is, it would have been prior to the change in the law. So has there been any analysis since then that Post has done around compliance?
I'm sure there has. I don't know off the top of my head. But we're always monitoring, looking at courses, especially on this topic. I feel like we have changed and updated these courses many times over.
So do you know if guidelines exist then for AB 953? Or have they been lost in the ether?
Not as a separate document, no. Yeah.
Okay. All right, but we know the trainer had been updated since, right? That had been updated.
That's what they're working on right now.
Yeah, so that's been like quite some time. Okay. I thank you for that. I don't know if anyone else has any clarification questions on that.
Okay, so then the last topic is on the field training program. So when a peace officer trainee graduates from the academy, the next step is to pass the field training program. So each program introduces the new officer to agency personnel, policies, and procedures. And the program must be a minimum of 10 weeks, and there are specific requirements mandated by posts that must be met. On average, most agency programs are 16 to 18 weeks, so above that minimum of 10. Post regulations 1004 and 1005 contain those program requirements. All field training officers must attend an FTO course in order to serve as an FTO. So there's twofold. So there's the FTO course to be an FTO, field training officer, and then there's the field training program that every new trainee must go through. So field training programs contain a minimum core competencies as developed by POST and must be approved by the POST Commission. One of those components is community relations and professional demeanor. That section or component includes cultural diversity, community policing, problem solving, and as well as racial profiling. There's an entire section with 6 components related to racial profiling in the field training manual or program manual. I'm happy to provide that information to be forwarded on. And then POST is currently in the process of streamlining and updating the FTO update course. This is the course for officers to serve as an FTO. We're adding specific reference to Learning Domain 42, Chapter 2. This is from the Academy. That's the Academy piece on racial profiling. And we are also looking to develop language to support this component in a real-world setting. And at that time, when we get to that part, we would seek RIPA's input for that piece. And I'm happy to answer any questions that I can about the field training program.
Did anyone have any questions on that piece?
And I'm happy to answer any other questions related to POST as well.
I had a general question, Megan, about the, we provided comments for a number of different areas to POST, and is there any input that you have on how that, or feedback, reporting back kind of on how that has been incorporated in any aspect of what POST is doing?
I do know that all of the comments that have been made, including in the report, all the recommendations, those do get forwarded on internally. I cannot answer as to like how those have been implemented, but I know that that's one thing that we've talked about with DOJ staff as to how we can better get that back to you all so that you can see where your work has been implemented.
And I guess one other little piece going back to the MOT training. So you said they're kind of in control of the content and the whole course, but is that based on and I'm sorry, I forget some of the different, I'm probably referring to the wrong documents by the wrong names, but is it based on some, like an outline, like the learning domain that relates to the topic? So they have to kind of derive it from what POST has already created as the kind of general course outline?
So for the Museum of Tolerance, because they're basically redoing the Train the Trainer course, anyone that does POST or anyone that seeks POST course certification has to go through the process of submitting their outlines, who their instructors are going to be. There's quite a bit of information that is submitted to POST. everyone has to go through that regardless. So where we are with that right now is because MOT basically is the one developing the course. We're just kind of waiting for them to start that process for the course certification. I'm not able to speak for MOT to know where they are in the process and, you know, who's still reviewing and all the different things that go into it. I just know that for the course certification piece, the necessary documents have not been submitted yet.
But I guess, is there anything created by Post though that tells folks who are creating a course what the required elements of that course have to be so that they can create it with that in mind, right? Is it?
Yes.
Isn't that reflected?
Yeah.
So
they're very aware of what they need to do.
So I guess what is that thing from Post though? Is that like the LD 42 that the training train has to reflect? Like what is the thing that Post has that outlines what that training needs to have and how we looked at that already, I guess.
That I don't know. So basically anyone that does any course certification knows what they have to submit. And then there's an internal process of how that works and forms they have to complete. So I'm trying to figure out how to explain it properly, but for yeah, so for this course in particular, like we're just waiting for MOT to submit those necessary things. I see Chief Randolph raising his hand over there.
Go ahead and jump in, Rich.
So Melanie, I'm gonna help Megan out, okay? So course outline, they would submit a course outline, materials, specific materials, everything that's presented into the course is anything and everything. It goes to Post, it's reviewed by the director. The state's broken up into different divisions. They review it, they send it up to Sacramento. Sacramento reviews it, kicks it back down and blesses that agency and that instructor. Yes, you can carry out this instruction for this particular learning domain because we feel you have mastered it. There's no bias. This is good to go. So it goes through quite a bit of an extension, and I've submitted courses and I've seen courses denied. So it's quite elaborate.
It's not an easy process.
So that seems to be, are you talking, Rich, then the course certification side of this? Is that what you're talking? Okay, so
Yeah,
but before it gets to that, right?
What the MOT is doing is, I imagine it's going to be pretty elaborate. I mean, I've been through Tools for Tolerance 23 times, and yes, it was outdated, and I did say that in our last meeting. So I imagine what they're doing now is updating it and incorporating a lot of the stuff, the RIPA recommendations, as well as what Post has put in as well. And I have shared some of that too with some of the MOT instructors myself personally. So I'm sure it's going to take a little bit of time because there's so many hands in it, because there's so many agencies running through the Tools for Tolerance program. That's why.
I'm sure like the certification process. So thank you for explaining kind of the different folks that are involved in that. So that hasn't happened yet, but I'm presuming, and maybe this is a wrong presumption though, that when an entity decides they want to create a training program that Post is going to use, there is something that they can look at to say, oh, as we're developing this, we need to make sure that we hit these elements because that's what the ultimate certification process is going to look at. Or like I'm training them on this thing, so I need to actually have that thing, or I'm training them on how to use a taser, so I need to know how to use a taser, and there are certain criteria. So I need the guidelines for how to use taser. So that's what I'm trying to ask. Is there anything that the MOT training must include that has been provided to them in advance, whether it reflects some existing training that Post has that's in some other part of the curriculum or anything like that?
I imagine since it hasn't been updated for some time, first of all, they've got specific Post guidelines for each particular learning domain. That one's going to include quite a bit since there's so many hands in that pot. So yes, they're probably updating it because it's been so outdated. And that's why this is taking some time and there's so many hands that are involved. But Post has specific guidelines, everything as far as what instructions go to the particular trainees and things of that nature. So yes.
Yeah,
so I guess
Melanie,
what is the
just to add on to that. So yes, there are certain thresholds that have to be met depending on what they are training on. But since we don't have the outline yet, I can't tell you what exactly they will need to provide. but it largely depends on what topics are being presented. Sometimes instructors do have to have additional training to do specific types of instruction. Those are all things that are they're notified on, that they're helped through that process. When certify any course, if the instructor or whatever they're teaching needs some further development or assistance on.
So POST provides no guidelines or identifies any learning domain that needs to be covered before the entity submits the certification package?
We do.
That's what I'm
It
asking.
largely,
That's what I'm
it
trying to
largely
figure what
depends
that
on the
was.
topic. It largely
So
depends on the topic.
So for this topic, what would be that learning domain that's supposed to be covered or guidelines?
That I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay. That would be, could we maybe share that as a follow-up? Just so that we know, because I don't, it may have been one of the ones that we've already looked at. And so I'm just wanting to know the relationship kind of between the what guidance POST is providing for needs to be covered and kind of what is actually happening, right?
Sure.
Thank you. And I don't know if anyone else has, I know other folks were really involved in the MOT training, so I don't know if they want any other questions too on this, but if there's no quite more questions for POST, happy to move on. Thank you, Megan, for that. Go ahead, Pastor Kennedy.
No, I don't have any questions. I was just trying to reflect on if we had specific guidelines as we were updating the curriculum. I know we went through everything and updated every section. I just don't remember anything up front saying you have to do this, 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 and this. And I could be wrong. I just don't remember that. So that's a great question, Melanie.
Thank you, Pastor Kennedy. And I know this is not technically on our agenda, but there is often someone from Museum of Tolerance present at the meetings. If there is someone here today that would like to speak to the status, I'm sure that would be much appreciated. But I don't know who all is on today. Okay, no worries. So thank you, Megan, again. If there's nothing else for POST, then I think we can move on to the next agenda item.
Okay, good morning. This is Aisha. We can, Co-Chair Ochoa, it depends on how you want to handle it. The DOJ staff is here to introduce each one of the topics that Allison mentioned. And so we have Kendall who can speak with respect to MOT, and then Jennifer Solomon, one of the attorneys at DOJ, who can talk about the dispatch program. And then I can tap on the other three to kind of get you going with respect to the discussion on the other three items. So maybe it might be good, since we were talking about MOT, to have Kendall start. Kendall, would you mind?
And I'll just add, since we just had a meeting in a different subcommittee yesterday, that DOJ kind of walked through gave kind of more substantive explanations of all the proposed sections, and then we just saved all our comments to the end. And I think that worked pretty well. So we can do that again today, I think.
Okay.
Unless any objections. Cool. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. My name is Kendall Micklethwaite. I'm an attorney with the California Department of Justice. I'll be doing just a really brief overview of MOT and the board's work to date. I do apologize. I keep getting kicked in and out of the system, so I was not able to hear Megan's full update on MOT, so I do apologize if this repeats a little bit. So last year, several of our board members participated in a curriculum update of the MOT Train the Trainer course. During that, board members attended multiple sessions with MOT and provided feedback on the old course materials. Several of the board members also gave testimonials to be included in the new MOT course. Finally, there was a video produced that was a companion to that MOT course that board members as well as DOJ were able to view the filming of and provide feedback during the filming of the course. It was our understanding from MOT and POST that this course would be rolled out this year. It was shared with us, and this was published in last year's report, that because of the current contract, that the course had to be completed by the end of the year. When we reached out to MOT at the beginning of this year, they shared with us they're still in the process of updating the course, but did not provide us any additional details. DOJ did request that MOT update us on any future course updates or when the course will be offered again. The board has been consistently involved since we've been invited, and board members have expressed a desire for more community members to be able to review and provide feedback on the new course materials. As Megan already shared, POST is under, has been shared that the course is still under modification, but POST is not aware of what stage the development of the course is in at the moment. This may also relate somewhat to MOT's budget. So we mentioned this in last year's report, but MOT legislatively received approximately $1.5 million a year for this course. Last year, a substantial portion of that budget was allocated to update the MOT course. POST did share with us, though, that this year they have been contracted to deliver this course 6 times, costing nearly $30,000 per presentation. We've not been told by either MOT or POST when those courses are scheduled for, but it does look like monies have been allocated for the delivery of that course. So those are some of the updates on the Train the Trainer. At the moment, for the board's ability to follow up on the course, it's still very much in the air. I know several board members are very interested in reviewing the updated course materials and providing comment, as well as getting additional community input. We can certainly reach out to MOT again, and if the board members have any specific questions of MOT, please share them with us today and we can try to communicate those to MOT. I don't believe a MOT representative is currently on the line, but that's the status of the course. Board members provided feedback. We're still waiting to see what that final updated course is going to look like. The board members have seen some outlines of the new course, but have not been able to view the course in full. So those are the updates we have right now on MOT. And after the other DOJ presentations, I'll be happy to answer any questions that I can. But unfortunately, I don't have a lot of information for the board at this time. And with that, I will turn it over to either Aisha or Jennifer.
Wow. Jennifer, I believe you, I'm not sure if you're going to give the update on the dispatcher course or from the work that DOJ has done with the board, or that would be Megan. Again.
So Megan and POST have agreed to give a presentation on the dispatcher training and the update of the dispatcher training, but I do want to give a brief introduction in terms of how we got here. So as you all may know, the RIPA board, well, first let me introduce myself. My name is Jennifer Solomon. I'm a Deputy Attorney General with the California DOJ. I worked with the Calls for Service subcommittee of this board for the previous year's report. Well, sorry, for the 2023 report in the previous year in 2022. That committee has been disbanded, and some of the work has been absorbed by this subcommittee. One of those items that was looked at by the Calls for Service subcommittee was dispatcher training, and that subcommittee engaged with POST specifically about the training and how that affects calls for service. So at the time, Post was updating for the first time in I think over a decade their dispatcher training, and are still in the process of updating it. So we have invited them here to give this subcommittee an overview of that dispatcher training update, and as well as an opportunity to ask questions of Post if they have questions. And with that, I will cede the floor to Megan.
I don't have any further updates other than what I mentioned before, that it's still, everything is still being worked on. We had several subject matter experts that were recommended from this committee that I know participated in different workshops to update the dispatcher course, but we're still working through it and don't anticipate it being made public or presented to the commission until June.
I guess the one follow-up on that I had is, so if it's being presented to the commission in June, where does that give? I assume that means that you're not going to present anything to the RIPA board until after that, or ask for input until after June. Is that right?
Correct.
So-
Yeah,
so
the
I guess
commission would get to see it first.
but will there be an opportunity to provide input then if we're not getting
Yes.
that? Because I know that there's been, with the other courses, it's been often, oh, thanks for your input, but we don't have time to implement it because now we're too far along in the process. So I guess, was there a longer trajectory of what that is supposed to look like, so we can know kind of what the actual room for engagement would be?
Yes, I don't know the timeline of that, but I do know that we have said that once the documents are made public, then we would invite input from the RIPA board at that time.
Oh, Lawanda has a question.
Yes, regarding the training, what about the community? Them viewing it before it's released, their impact, they need to have a say in that. Their voices need to be heard. So how are we going to include that before anything is released? And I'm
I
also,
do not. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm not aware of where they are or who was included in all of those workshops. I do know that there were members of the community that were included in some of those subject matter expert workshops, but I don't know who they were exactly off the top of my head. But you know, Post does its due diligence to make sure that everybody is included when we're doing updates such as this.
Before any final is released, I'm asking that the community be allowed to see it before we say, before Post even sign off on it. They need to have their impact because we have things going on. And no, the new thing is everyone's supposed to be included. And so.
Yeah, the documents will be made available to the public at the same time that they're made available to the commission. Just because it's being presented to the commission doesn't mean that it's the final say and the end all be all and no one else can weigh in. You know, like I said, I know that we planned on seeking RIPA feedback once the commission was allowed to weigh in, and I'm not sure what else they have in store as far as who's going to review that training, but we always welcome feedback from the public.
Another question, this dispatch training, I didn't know anything about that, and there's going to be a video released on that. I want to know, are we going to be able to see that too before it's released and put into, before it's released?
I'm not aware of the video, but like I said, everybody will be made, the public will be able to see the training that's being updated.
And maybe this is either for you, Megan, or for someone at the DOJ, since this was previously in the calls for service subcommittee. Was there any other engagement from that committee on this? I know that they put out the larger call to the whole board to suggest subject matter experts, but I don't know if beyond that there was any other engagement with the board in this.
I do know that
My-
there, go ahead, Jennifer.
My recollection of where we left that off was Post was still gathering subject matter experts and engaging in workshops to gather information to update the training when the board was still involved. As the board was as the subcommittee was finalizing its section for the year, Post was still involved in that process, but I think since then they have completed it. So since the completion of the workshops, the subcommittee has not been involved in the training.
Thank you. And this is like a larger, maybe suggestion for any of the things that come through here. And I don't know if this is possible to execute, but I know that we post the items that we're looking at, like if it's a learning domain or whatever, on the agenda for the meeting. I can't recall now how early that specific piece gets circulated. I think it might sometimes come later than the initial agenda was initially circulated. But if there might be a way to allow the RIPA space also to be a place that can solicit more public feedback on those things, whether it's throwing up something on the website, or directing folks who are already on the mailing list that there are specifically these these trainings that we're looking for input on, so that they can submit public comments in that way or something, if there's not already going to be like a more cultivated outreach with community folks, at least allow this to be a space that gets some of that input. I don't know how if there's a way that we can actually execute that, but that's just one suggestion that might be useful. Pastor Kennedy?
Here's how it fleshes out when we get into the here's how it fleshes out when we get to the community. Having input on the community input on the curriculum. It's when we have police forums in the community, we can stand and say, the community gave input on this training. It builds the relationships that we're trying to build with the police and the community. But if it's done in isolation and the community has no input, community's kind of like an afterthought, it's hard for us to stand and genuinely engage the community and say, hey, we had input. All right, so that's why we really pressed Mike at our meetings, our subcommittee meetings, in developing the curriculum, the racial identity profiling curriculum. We really engaged him and asked him if we could bring the community stakeholders back to the table to review that updated curriculum, and then have that curriculum signed off, not only by the Post group, but also by the subject matter experts from the community, UCLA, USC, attorneys, etc. That just gives some more validity, and it just makes our state a better state. We're trying to back up to the level it really should be. We want to be a leader in the state of California, so we need everyone at all levels to cooperate in this process.
Thank you, Pastor Kennedy. Did anyone else have comments on that? I know I wholeheartedly agree, and I'd love to see the community as well as the RIPA board brought in at the earliest phase possible, so that we can start things off on the right foot, and rather than try to course correct at the end. So I'd love to see ways we can make that happen. Maybe any recommendations that Post might have to how they could operationalize that, particularly when we're talking about trainings that go to literally every agency in the state. This is not a one-off, right? This is really crucial to get this right in the first place. Okay, is there any more that folks want to? Oh, I see that Ronnie is joined. Ronnie, do you want to introduce yourself, and if you have any question or comment?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Melanie. Ronaldo Villeda, pronouns he, his, him, Executive Director of Hoops for Justice. Yeah, and I agree with Pastor Kennedy. definitely want to uplift and second what he just mentioned. I think just to kind of ground us in terms of the conversations we had when we first set out to update the training, was to have a comprehensive and cohesive curriculum with input from all key stakeholders. So I definitely want to ask Post, how can we incorporate subject matter experts that we have within our networks? Because it's been falling short every time that we have the opportunity to potentially introduce a subject matter expert. Typically the timeline is too short and it doesn't work out, and it doesn't give us ample time to be able to really engage the people that we're trying to engage, whether it's community, whether it's subject matter experts. So how do we create a process that allows us to bring people in to give the feedback that's necessary before we even publish it to the public?
Thank you, Ronnie. If there's nothing else on the dispatch training, then we can go on to the next. And I know we've been giving feedback a little bit on some of these things, but I think at the end, our goal will be to identify priorities for the report. So also just keep that in mind as well as we're moving through. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Aisha Martin Walton. And I am a retired Department of Justice Administrator 3, and I have been fortunate enough to come out of retirement and work on these issues with the Civil Rights Enforcement team, Nancy and Allison and the team. And so I'm happy to be here, and just I love the robust discussion that you all are having on these important issues. And just to remind everyone, and especially there's a new member on the post subcommittee, that there's the post section in the report is very robust, and there's also a list of best practices. And one of the things that you all underscored in the best practices section with respect to the community being more involved is one recommendation to post is to develop a robust plan for engaging individuals from communities most profiled as evidenced by the annual RIPA report data in reviewing and providing feedback. So that's right on point with what you've been talking about. And even to another recommendation is to appoint a community engagement coordinator to ensure meaningful community input is considered and included in all post courses involving interactions with the public. So those are two of community related issues that you have recorded and raised. What I'd like to do is just kind of touch on 3 other topics that the board, the subcommittee has talked about from time to time, and especially with respect to where we are right now. So namely, as board members, what the board has done is over the past several years, you've reviewed several expanded courses and provided feedback to post. The input to the board was aimed at helping post deliver training that would result in a behavior pattern changes to the officers. And at the end of this, the board has found that a lot of the behavior has not changed. And this is based on the RIPA data. So therefore, it may be useful for the board at this point to look at some of those issues that you have talked about in the past, such as the guidelines. One of the things that Post does is develop guidelines, and then as they have indicated, those guidelines are in the trainings, and you've already started that discussion. So the question might be, what techniques are being used to integrate the guidelines into the training? So you're having that discussion as it relates to AB 953 and racial profiling. With respect to the field training program, as Megan has indicated, this is somewhat the part 2 of the academy courses. And again, since this is a course that you have not looked at, but the question still remains with respect to racial identity profiling is how does POST integrate the racial and identity program? And it sounds like from what Megan has indicated, she has shared with you that there are several aspects of the field training program that does touch on racial and identity profiling. So, and also because I think Allison also said how large this course is, it's probably something, if you choose to look at this, that you would not be able to do in a year. So one approach that you might want to think about is having posts come in and on a continuous basis share with you and educate you more about this program. But those are choices that you can make. The third one is officer accountability. And again, this is tied to the statute, just like the guidelines and the training requirements. And this is the issue of how do the expanded courses deliver on the obligations by the statute, the obligations for peace officers to prevent and report racial profiling. So these are all things that you all have talked about in the past. And as you think about and talk about what may make sense for you to be able to address in this report, building on those conversations in the past, in addition to the MOT training and the dispatcher training. So hopefully that gives you just kind of a general jumping off place to begin your discussion.
Go ahead, Rich.
I have quite a few questions, but I'll wait till the whole board kind of puts in their 2 cents. Aisha, thank you for that report. You said something which is really concerning to me, and I'd really like to dive into that. And one of them is the RIPA data that has been brought in and given to post, or recommendations have been provided by this RIPA board, and those implementations have not been done by post. I'd like to see that report. I know I jumped on the RIPA board probably about 1.5 years ago, and I'd like to see what recommendations have not been taken into consideration. There must be documentation on that, so I'd like to see what the staff has generated. I think that's only fair. The other thing is we're talking about RIPA data, and we still have only done our implementation or the full rollout. We're still digesting the whole state rollout. So to continue to say that we're challenging or law enforcement is not performing or whatnot, I'd like us to look at all the data. I think it's a little early right now. The data you're looking at is from your previous agencies. I want to say 11 or 12 agencies, LAPD, LA Sheriff, that's what we kept hearing, the larger agencies. I'd like to start looking at all that data. So to throw it out, I think it's kind of premature. And I'm just trying to, once again, as I echo every meeting, I just want to maintain credibility up in Sacramento for the RIPA board. And I think those are pretty strong statements right now. I'd like us to just wait till we get some more information before we make statements like that.
Again, just FYI, this is all information that's contained in the RIPA report that you all created last year. So just to make sure that's clarified.
Thanks, Aisha. I just dropped in the chat just as a question to DOJ folks, because I know there's a number of different folks on the line. A question as to what percentage of officers within the state are covered by the different waves that already started collecting the data. And I know, yes, Rich is absolutely correct that there's a lot of agencies that are just now coming online. But I think in terms of the number of officers that are covered within the earlier waves of agencies, I think we've reported that somewhere, but I just don't have it offhand, so someone might have it. But it's to know whether that's the bulk of officers, even if there's smaller agencies, because this RIPA applies to any agency that employs peace officers. So even if they have a single officer, right, that's a separate agency. But I think we can. Obviously, we can't speak to officers who aren't covered, but we can say that and maybe we can qualify it in this way if this is helpful, that for the agencies that have been reporting, there has not been a change, right? I think that is consistent with what the data would show. And if that's a helpful way to parse the data, I'm happy to be clearer on that.
just to, excuse me, to respond to your question, Melanie. So the 2023 report covered 58 law enforcement agencies in California, collecting data on over 3 million stops from January to December 2021. So that was the waves 1, 2, and 3 agencies, and that included the 23 largest agencies. And I'm trying to see, I don't think we've indicated the total number of officers, although I might be able to find that. But it was, last year's report did cover the 58 enforcement agencies, including the largest 23. So that was waves 1, 2, and 3. And so all of those agencies, were included in last year's report, and then this year, obviously, will include all of the agencies in California. So this year will be over 500 agencies.
And I can just to your other, you had a question, Rich, on what were the recommendations that have been made. I know that I think in the past, sent over the minutes to post, because a lot of things are one that either be present, so sometimes there's a discussion, but if not present, or to just memorialize what some of the recommendations are sent over. And I'm sure staff would be happy to send you those minutes so that you can see what the recommendations have been over time to post, in addition to the ones that were written in the reports. And then we've asked a number of times, even like today, I think we asked with Megan how Post has incorporated, and we haven't received any real insight onto how they have been. And I think you'll see in some of the discussions that we've been told there wasn't time to incorporate anything that we had proposed. So I think if you want to just take a look at those things, I think that might answer your questions, since that does predate some of your time on this subcommittee. Sean, go ahead.
Could I get those too, just to get up to speed? Be helpful. Thanks.
That'd be great. I'm sure they're happy to send them. Any other comments on this specific, or questions specifically on this piece? And then we can talk about them all kind of collectively too at the end, once we get the last few presentations from DOJ. Okay, great. I think we can go ahead to the last two, or maybe one. Is it just on the accountability for Post, or was that kind of encompassed in what we just talked about?
Oh, I'm sorry. Was that a question for me, Melanie?
Yeah, I don't know. Was that, I know you talked about the guidelines and the field training. Did you also talk about the accountability for Posts in the courses of instruction, which was how I had written down the last point?
Yes. And just real quick, back on the field training program, another area which is consistent with what you have raised in previous reports about the other courses is how the trainers are selected. But going forward with respect to accountability, it's basically one of the requirements in the statute. And it's also a recommendation that was raised in the last report by your subcommittee to the board. And so the question is, because the statute requires that officers be trained in the area, or the training have an aspect on police officer accountability, reporting, and the duty to intervene. That something that you all have discussed in the past? As going forward, is that something that you want to continue discussing or consider for this year's report?
Okay, thank you. Did anyone want to, now that we've had kind of a summary of kind of all the possible initial suggestions, did anyone want to raise additional suggestions or speak about those in terms of where they'd like to see the subcommittee focus efforts?
I'm not sure how this fits, but I think we need to really see the process through. We have a completed process where we're not just talking about the end user of these products, but how these products are produced, and that they stop through each proper channel before they get to the end user. And so that we can say we have a complete process that is um, normalized, not the exception, not every once in a while, but the curriculum's developed, community input is given, we make adjustments to the curriculum, then we roll out the curriculum. And when police officers violate the curriculum, there's accountability. We also need to, when police officers do well by the curriculum, we need to figure out ways to say, hey, they're doing well. We're doing better in California. So we're constantly saying what they're not doing. But when they start doing these things consistently across the board, these new things, then we need to say something about that as well. So I think somehow we need to develop the process where it's proven and tested. It's not an exception, it's a normalized process.
So, Pastor Kennedy, are you speaking of the understanding and then making recommendations as to the process that POST goes through for each of the trainings? Is that what you're kind of, just in terms of what to like the
Yes.
instruction? Okay.
Right. So we're not back at this place, next year, this time. Well, is the community going to get to give input? Are we waiting till the last minute and then the community doesn't have time to give input and we just roll out curriculum? This process really needs to be normalized. It's what we have asked, well, here's how it fleshes out. So you have the attorney general at a police forum, and the community says, hey, did we have any input in this? Well, the attorney general needs to be able to say yes. And the attorney general needs to say, this is a normalized process. We put this in place. It's happening. Yes, it's happening. So that's all I'm saying. However we figure that out, it's up to the committee, but we shouldn't be at this place every year asking for permission to get the community to give input into these programs or this curriculum.
So in terms of if we did that, would the report be getting information from POST? I guess so. There's kind of two ways of thinking about that. It's either just prescriptive or descriptive and prescriptive. So we would get information from POST on kind of the timelines on how they've operated for various trainings, particularly ones that are closely related to kind of our subject matter. And then looking at those, then we provide recommendations as to how we think it could be improved to meet these needs. Does that sound kind of what you're proposing?
Great question. I'm not sure how it's going to flesh out. I just don't want to be at this place again next year asking, can we get community input into the curriculum? I just don't think we need to keep coming back to this place.
Okay, absolutely. I see Luanda, go ahead.
I support Pastor. We don't need to keep coming back to this because this can be resolved. All they have to do is say that the community can have input. But I'm with the pastor too. We need to see the program all the way through. A lot of us participated in the program last year and we haven't seen it through because they told us it had to be completed by December. And so somehow the community didn't have a time. But now, since we know that it didn't have to be completed by December, there needs to be some form of an adjustment just to see, to bring everyone who's new on the board and to bring the community and bring all of us in on what are the adjustments so we can see this through. And then we can go in there to see them actually put it into training when they train the officers so we can see the output just on the 58, because a lot of those agencies, the 23 or 28 big agencies, are in locations where we can track real quick after the training. Real quick. It can be done in real time. especially with what's happening right now. But we do have to get a partnership with Post to be able to do this, because without it, we won't be able to see it through and make any corrections or any adjustments that need to happen during it. So I think we can. I'm just waiting for Post to just tell us. I'm quite sure they will be willing to partner with us in something like this, because we're talking about the community. And when we talk about the community, we're talking about law enforcement too, because all of us are the community. We all play a role in it. So it's for all of us to see, because law enforcement needs to have an input in on it too, just like so I'm saying everyone needs to have the input. So I'm quite sure Post is going to help us with this and make it happen, since we do have this extra time to make sure that every stakeholder, every stakeholder has a voice.
Well,
and
it would be
heard.
nice to put into the report, this year's report, that Post verbally agreed to have the community who looked at the previous curriculum, the community experts, look at the new curriculum, sign off on it. And Mike also noted that if there's anything glaring that we missed, that is to be written in this year's contract so we can adjust that before it comes out, or we can make a quick adjustment in the next year. So it really would be nice to show where the RIPA board and Post and Museum of Tolerance are working very closely together and getting this stuff done, and then have a normalized process. So that's all I'm trying to say with this. We got to see this through so that the subject matter experts from the community signs off on it, just like they did 20 years ago. And that's what gave that curriculum 20 years ago credibility, because several people in the community, like Danny Bakewell and different ones, signed off on that curriculum.
And I guess one thing too, to think about it, because I know Post specifically said that they're not in control of this, it's all MOT. But given that the course certification process is what is controlled by Post, I'm sure that they could add to that direction for MOT to engage with the community before submission, or incorporate that into the course certification process so that it's incorporated in there, where Post does have more flexibility. So I think that's all a great idea, and that's maybe one way that they could operationalize it, since they said it's in control of MOT, unless MOT just wants to voluntarily incorporate that, which is also another possible solution to that problem. I wanted to just add another suggestion on something to look at, which kind of falls under some of the things that have already been discussed, but I think looking at some of the compliance with the law as to kind of Post's creation of trainings, and specifically the law, as Aisha mentioned, directs Post to establish guidelines to be disseminated. And so I appreciate Megan's valiant effort to try to track down the historical creation of those guidelines. But if it has to go through all that effort, that seems to me that they're not meaningfully complying with that direction, right? If they don't have guidelines that they can put their hand on and actually say that they're being incorporated into these materials and being able to disseminate per the law. And as I've mentioned many times in these conversations, much of the training that was provided, at least in the old MOT Train the Trainer curriculum, did not comply with the law. And I've seen that the effects of that in conversations with local policing agencies in terms of what they consider to be profiling is actually much less than what the law actually considers to be profiling. And that has significant impacts on how officers police the community, and what agencies even discipline officers for it, because it has to be incorporated in the policy for it to be a policy violation. if officers engage in a particular way. So I think taking a harder look at some of the requirements and the regulation that are directed to post, and really getting a better understanding of how they comply with those or don't comply, so we can provide recommendations on to how they can come into compliance on those pieces. Either get in court, like some of the training requires incorporation of evidence-based patterns and practices, and I don't know, we've repeatedly recommended that the RIPA data and other evidence be incorporated into these trainings, and we haven't seen it yet. Maybe it is now in the trainer curriculum, but I think because this material goes in so many places in post trainings, that we're not seeing them. We've raised them in the LD reviews, etc. So I think that's a really important piece that we can also be looking at, if their development of the legal guidelines that are being proliferated to all of the agencies and how they've kind of complied with those legal requirements. I think that would be something that we can look at and would be very useful for creating some strong recommendations coming out of it, both to post and the legislature. I don't know if folks have other comments or recommendations. I see Ronnie dropped something in the chat. I don't know if you want to come off mute and make any recommendations.
Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, I like what Pastor Kennedy just mentioned. I do agree with like a structured collaborative process between the board and post to review these trainings and curriculums with our input, allow us to bring in subject matter experts and community members in a timely manner. It's something that we can do once we establish it and have a fixed kind of timeline. It's something that we can just do every year to ensure that we're meeting the goals that we're trying to reach as a board for racial identity profiling. But I feel like we need more than just a verbal commitment. We need actual tangible next steps and a commitment to execute this process. Yeah, I think that's very important. I mean, we're going to continue to be doing this work year in, year out. This is a process that I think would make it easier for the input to be given from the board and community members and subject matter experts. So to me, it makes perfect sense to establish something like this.
Okay, thank you. I don't know, Sean, if you had anything you wanted to add, or we could open up to public comments and we can circle back to give direction to DOJ after we hear from the public.
Yeah, I don't have anything out at this time. I'm trying to get up to speed. I appreciate the dialogue, and it's been great so far.
Great, thank you. So I'll open it up to public comments before we circle back and do our next steps. NorCal, is there anyone from NorCal? I'll go geographically as folks, as we tend to do. So are there NorCal folks who are? Is there? Anyone from Central California? Southern California? Michelle, go ahead.
Yes, hi, thank you so much. Michelle Wittig from the Santa Monica Coalition for Police Reform, speaking as an individual. I'm concerned about whether Post is going to revise its curriculum in accord with the lawsuit that ACLU sought against PORAC and the Pomona Police Department. As a result of the settlement of that lawsuit, all agencies are required to update their use of force training in accord with AB 392. However, even after the settlement was announced, the president of PORAC, I think his name is Brian Marvel, said that he doesn't see any reason to change what they've already been doing. Well, if he doesn't see it, then does Post? And I would implore this commission to write a letter to Post asking how, if at all, it's going to revise its use of force training in accord with not only 392, but in accord with the court case that the ACLU brought to force Post to revise its curriculum on use of force in accord with a law that was signed by Governor Newsom in 2019. Thanks.
Thank you, Michelle. Are there any other comments from Southern California? And then anyone that I may have missed? Okay, thank you. With respect to just because I'm at the ACLU, that was not my case, but I'm familiar to some degree with the case. And I would have to check and see the status of, I think during the course of the time frame of the litigation, Post made some amendments to its training, and I'm not sure whether the current training actually does comply with what we would say are the state required standards, and I would have to look into that. So I can't advise right at the moment as I sit here as a commission letter, but given the disparate impact of uses of force and deadly uses of force in particular against people of color, I think that's definitely within the scope of what the commission could request Post to do for writing a letter. So I'll definitely look into that, and if I can find any more information on it, I'd be happy to report back to the full board when we have our next meeting, if that's something that folks are interested in doing, and if anyone wants to comment on that.
Definitely something worth hearing about. Thank you.
Okay, sounds good.
I agree.
Okay. So now it's time for next steps to just determine precisely what we're going to be doing. There was a lot of back and forth on the engagement and maybe coming up with kind of consistent best practices / recommendations on how Post should be engaging. Does the DOJ kind of have enough, and it seemed like there was consensus around that, does the DOJ have enough information on that to start kind of that process and building out what that would look like for part of the report?
Are you asking or suggesting that all of the prior recommendations be pulled together, that perhaps when Encompass reads like a process? I'm just not sure.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion, Aisha. Because we have addressed this in past reports on kind of the ways in which we felt that they were not sufficiently kind of engaging the public or doing other things. So would it make sense to compile those into just a process type recommendation, or is there other information gathering that would be useful to have on this question? Kind of what are you imagining? Because it could look a few different ways. If there's something in particular that you think should go beyond just compiling those existing recommendations into a process. Well, then if there's no specific suggestions, how about we start there? And maybe as that's happening, maybe you'll see that there's gaps or something that we haven't talked about or discussed, and we can further engage or supplement from that. Would that be a good first step, Aisha? I think you're muted.
Yes, absolutely. That would give us enough direction to get started in a meaningful way.
Okay, great. And then there were no objections to, especially since that seems like if it's dealing with a lot of our past recommendations, may not be a huge lift in terms of time. So perhaps focusing on the guidelines or any other ways in which we can look into kind of post compliance with the statutory requirements directed to them in terms of developing the trainings and the guidelines and anything else. And then beyond that, is there anything else that folks really wanted to see in the report, or does that seem like enough, or what does the DOJ also think on that?
I think that's a great start. The only other question raised, because you will have in the report a chapter or a paragraph for some information on MOT. You'll have information on the dispatch. You'll have all of the previous recommendations included in a process format. And then the only other question is, do you want to use this year to also learn more about the field training program? And maybe that's an educational effort with posts coming in and at your future meetings to educate you more about that course before you decide whether or not you want to look into it.
I think that would make sense. And also maybe if we can continually get any feedback on how our comments or recommendations have been incorporated into anything that Post is doing. I think the dispatch seems like it's not moving until June would be the earliest that we'd be able to look at that sometime after June. So it might be too late to do something significant on the dispatch training. But yeah, we can definitely update as to where we are. And we may want to have this a placeholder piece, because I can imagine this year, whether it's in Post specifically or broader somewhere in the report, I'm sure there's going to be legislation moving that will either involve Post in intersection with like profiling requirements or other things. So we may want to talk about that, but I'm sure there's going to be other legislation moving, and we know that there is on other things related to RIPA recommendations. So I don't know if we want to just have a separate kind of legislative section ultimately in the report, or if we just want to make sure that we touch on whatever that is that relates to Post in our section. But we can hold a placeholder for now in the RIPA in the Post section.
Allison, thanks.
Yeah, I think if there is any relevant legislation, we can certainly bring that in. I mean, we always have a section at the end of the report for relevant legislation for RIPA related, anything really that relates to the broad topic of racial and identity profiling. But if there are specific, I think as we did in last year's report, if there are specific things about Post and training, we can certainly include them as well, specifically in the Post section as well. And that's something that, again, is tracking the legislation, but in terms of write-up is not a huge lift. So that's definitely something we can do in addition to these other topics.
Great, thank you. Is there anything else for DOJ that we need to decide on or give direction for that we haven't touched on yet?
No, I would say no, but I would pitch it to my other colleagues.
I guess the main question, and I think the subcommittee will probably have a better sense, since we're anticipating holding our second board meeting in June. I think by the next Post subcommittee meeting, which will likely be in May, to occur before that full board meeting, have a better sense perhaps of whether the subcommittee might be able to review the dispatch training this year or part of it, or if that's something that the board will take on next year as part of its review. So I think hopefully by May, we'll at least have a better sense of how the other topics are fleshing out and whether that's something the subcommittee would like to take on this year, or whether it ends up being too much in terms of bandwidth for the subcommittee, and in which case we could review it next year. So I think that's something we can kind of put a placeholder for, and see how things develop with these other sections.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you. Any final comments from any board members? And otherwise, then we will just adjourn slightly early. Okay. All right. Well, thank you all for your time. Thank you to the members of the public for listening and engaging. And thank you to the DOJ for the great outline of all the things that we can accomplish this year, and always chiming in with great input and information. All right. Thank you all. See you at the board meeting.